We are rapidly approaching the end of the year, and if you haven't yet met your yearly reading goal, the best advice I can give to you is to pick up a bunch of novellas. Hi, my name is Allie. Welcome to my channel where we chat about all things bookish. Today I have 24 novellas to help you crush your 2024 reading goals. All of these novellas are diverse in some way, whether they are written by a BIPOC author, they have queer representation, disability representation, or they're an indie book. They're all going to be diverse, and there's going to be something in here for everyone. First up, we have the Monk and Robot series by Becky Chambers. This is a sci-fi novella duology that starts with a Psalm for the Wild Built, and the second one is A Prayer for the Crown Shy. I read A Psalm for the Wild Built earlier this year and really enjoyed it. This novella follows monk Dex, who is trying to figure out kind of why they're here and what their purpose and their passion is in their life. In order to do this, Dex picks up the title of tea monk, where their job is basically to go around, travel to different villages and cities, and be a listening ear to people, providing them tea, providing them comfort, providing them advice, whatever they need in that moment. And while this is fulfilling for a while for Dex, they start to wonder again, is this truly why they're here and what their existence is for? And so they put away the tea monk side of themselves and they go to a place where no humans have gone for a very long time. And in doing so, they meet the robot named Moscap. What ensues after that is just conversations about why we exist, what our purpose and passions are in life, and just overall love and friendship. I think I rated A Psalm for the Wild Built around 4.5 stars, maybe 4 stars. I really did enjoy it. I thought the pacing was absolutely well done. I really liked the story of Dex and Moscap. It did get a little existential, a little too existential, I guess, for me at the end, where I started to kind of dissociate a little bit, so I kind of knocked it off for that. But that's, of course, my personal opinion and my personal preference, and I know many people who have rated this book 5 stars. I haven't yet read A Prayer for the Crown Shy, but this is supposed to be the next book in the series following Dex and Moscap to whatever they get up to next. The next novella I recommend is The Dead Cattail Assassins by Djeli Clark. Now, I read this novella going into it completely blind. The only thing that I knew about it is that it's called The Dead Cattail Assassins by Djeli Clark. It has fantastical elements, and also that it was really highly recommended. Honestly, going into this novella blind was the perfect way to consume this material. The plot is so action-packed and shocking and twisty and turny that I think if I knew anything going into it, that it just wouldn't have been the same experience. So unfortunately for you, I'm not going to tell you anything about this novella except for that you should read it and that I think you would like it if you like assassins, action-packed plots, and also conversations surrounding like time and alternate universes and like funky stuff with that. If you love those things, I think you will really like The Dead Cattail Assassins. Highly recommend. I rated this one very highly, and the only criticism I have is that the action scenes were a little bit too actiony for my specific liking. I have aphantasia, and sometimes when there's a huge action scene with lots of things going on, I get a little lost because I can't kind of visualize what people are doing or where they are like in the space. And so that took away a little bit of the story for me, but I still loved it. Not only are we approaching the end of the year, but we're also rapidly approaching the Christmas season, if that is something you celebrate. And since it is the season, I would love to recommend to you Merry and Bright by Jenn Collignon. This is a contemporary romance novella, and it is very sapphic. In Merry and Bright, Margot Mary is a bookstore owner, and Jacqueline Bright, or Jack Bright, is a bakery owner. On Christmas Eve, Jack is heading home but sees that Margot is still at the bookstore and stops by just to make sure that everything is okay and Margot doesn't need any help in preparing for the winter storm that is about to be upon them. When Jack gets to the bookstore, she finds that Margot is in crisis mode as there's a leak from the cafe upstairs and her books and her special collection could be potentially succumbed to that leak. So Jack drops everything to help Margot out. They stop the leak, and by the time everything is safe, The storm has raged on and they are unable to get home. The two of them have to spend the night together in the bookstore in a very magical, Christmassy, snowy setting. And of course, the twist is that these two have had crushes on each other for such a long time, and this night might be the very best night to come to terms with those crushes and to maybe have some fun in the bookstore. There is on-page spice in this novella, and what I really like about the spicy scene is that it spans 2 chapters. Now, this book was a dual POV, so one chapter we get Margot's, and then one chapter we get Jack's POV. And so it was really cool to have that like spicy moment be from both POVs in the book. I rated Merry and Bright 5 stars, but I will say that I'm not a big contemporary romance reader. So I am not really quite as attuned to how I want to rate contemporary romance novels, but the fact that I loved the characters, I thought the pacing was really well done, and that I just had a genuinely fun time with this cozy little sapphic Christmas story, that was enough for me to rate it 5 stars. And to be honest, reading this novella really made me want to read more contemporary romance stories because I had such a genuinely fun time with it. The next recommendation I have is Noor by Nnedi Okorafor. This is an Afro-futuristic sci-fi novella, and I absolutely adore this book. Our main character in Noor is A.O., who is a disabled woman and has replaced a lot of her parts in herself with technology. After a very unfortunate incident, she knows she's going to be hunted down by the government, so A.O. takes off into exile. On the run, she meets the Fulani herdsman D&A, who ends up also being exiled from his community. D&A and A.O. take off in search of a safe place that they can hide in northern Nigeria, away from the government and in safety for themselves. So such a poignant story on disability and technology, and family and culture and being at odds with the government, that I just enjoyed the heck out of it, and I know that I want to read anything that Nnedi Okorafor writes just from reading this novella. And speaking of that, Nnedi Okorafor has written a novella trilogy, which is the Binti trilogy. Now, I actually haven't read Binti or the other 2 books in the trilogy, but like I said, after reading Noor, I know that Nnedi Okorafor is an author for me. This one is another sci-fi novella, and I'm just going to read a little excerpt from the back. Her name is Binti, and she is the first of the Himba people ever to be offered a place at Umza University, the finest institution of higher learning in the galaxy. But to accept the offer will mean giving up her place in her family, to travel between the stars among strangers who do not share her ways or respect her customs. Knowledge comes at a cost, one that Binti is willing to pay, but her journey will not be easy. That is a little bit for the first book, and like I said, there are 2 more, and I definitely want to read this trilogy of novellas. The next novella recommendations I have is actually a set of 5 novellas, all written by Nghi. This is 5 books for the Singing Hills cycle. So we have The Empress of Salt and Fortune, When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain, Into the Riverlands, The Brides of High Hill, and Mammoths at the Gates. Out of all of these, I've only read the first 3, but I absolutely loved each and every single one of them, and I'm super excited to read these 2. I know that Nghi is actually planning on writing more in this cycle, which is super exciting for me. Now, in the Singing Hills cycle, these are all kind of interconnected standalones. So you could read them in any order and you wouldn't be really missing anything. There's no progression of storyline. They're just simply tales. And I really think that is one of the components that makes me love them. The thing that connects all 5 of these stories, though, is that we're following the adventures of the cleric Chi and their animal companion, who's a hoopoe bird named Almost Brilliant. As a cleric for their monastery, it is Chi's job to go around the country and collect stories. Stories of history, stories of folktale, and stories of the people that currently live there. And as all hoopoe birds do, Almost Brilliant has an eidetic memory, and so her job is to follow along with Chi to make sure that they're not missing anything when they bring the stories back to the monastery. These are such wonderfully queer normative, gripping little tales. They are heartwarming and cozy, story, even if they get violent or shaky, I really do feel like these feel like folk tales that have been passed on for generations. And it is that wonderful feeling of like comfort, yet historical, yet like so rich storytelling that we have going on that really draws me to them. When someone wants a recommendation to get out of a reading slump, I'm always going to recommend these books. When someone wants a recommendation to start to get into fantasy, I'm going to be recommending these books. I think that these novellas are such a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful set of books to read, stories to tell, and stories to keep coming back to time and time again. The next set of novellas that I recommend are 3 graphic novels, and I've only read the first one, which is The Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill. Even though I've only read the first one, I absolutely loved it, and I know that I want to continue reading the next 2. This is a set of 3 graphic novels that have the most beautiful, cozy, comforting, warm art and art style that just really drew me to this work. In the first book, The Tea Dragon Society, we're following a young girl who finds a dragon in an alleyway, and knowing that it is a tea dragon and it is a pet, she finds the dragon's owners who run the tea shop in the town. She expresses her interest in the art of caretaking of tea dragons, and she is kind of thrown into this world of tea dragons and comfort and found family. The graphic novels are queer normative, they have disability representation, they're very diverse, and I adore how comfy and cozy they make you feel when you read them. Two Screams, One Sugar by Sullivan is the next novella that I recommend. It is a fantasy mystery and it explores themes of like black, queer joy, as this is a sapphic friends to lovers novella. In this novella we have Destiny, who is a writer and who's trying to make progress on a big break towards finding out who the paintbrush killer is so that she can keep her job. In the latest crime scene of the paintbrush killer, she stumbles into Jada, who is a crime scene artist, and they quickly become friends and after that quickly fall in love. So the story is about them finding out who the paintbrush killer is while also kind of falling in love with each other and loving each other, and then at the end finding out who done it. This novella also has on-page spice, and even though it is touted as a fantasy mystery, I would say it is very much into the mystery part with only a little bit of the fantasy attached. So if you're not a big fantasy reader, it's still a great recommendation, but if you are a big fantasy reader, then there's enough of a little bit of fantastical elements that is going to make it a fantasy book while still keeping it a little bit more on the urban side. I really did enjoy this novella. I think that Sullivan's intention of making it more joyful and cozy, even though we are dealing with like a murder mystery, it came through. I really did feel the joy on the page. I felt the joy of the love between Jada and Destiny. My only like criticism of this book is that it does kind of jump a little bit in the timeline. We find that like Jada and Destiny meet, and then like we have one little more scene, and then like they're living together and they're in love. And it was just a little bit jarring where I was like, I wanted a little bit more of the building of the relationship as opposed to just like, here they meet, here they're flirting, and then boom, we're in it for the long haul, which is perfectly fine, especially when we're talking about lesbians. But I just would prefer the pacing of the relationship in such a short story to be a little different, whether that was like an established love already, or maybe they you know, maybe it's more about following them as they fall in love very quickly. It was just a little blum, 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 and I would rather it be more of a story. But that is my only kind of criticism of that. But again, my personal preference, and it still was a very lovely story. The next novella I recommend is Guarding Gus by Karryn Nagel. It is actually the first in a trilogy, but I think it is the only book in this trilogy that I would classify as a novella due to its length. The second book, What to Suspect When You're Suspecting, that came out recently, is a little bit longer, and I believe that the third book is probably going to be on the longer side as well. Putting that aside though, Guarding Gus was absolutely adorable and absolutely lovely. We have another lovely little queer story, a very cozy, fantastical story. In this novella we have two strangers, Nico and Brant, who find a baby gargoyle named Gus together and decide that they are both going to take on the responsibility of taking care of this gargoyle, this baby gargoyle, Gus, and doing it together. The two fall into a very tight-knit, loving, and respectful friendship, and we have a lot of positive masculinity in this book. So this novella is following Nico and Brant as they learn how to take care of a baby gargoyle and where Gus might be from and who he might be escaping from, as evident by their first encounter with this baby gargoyle. It is super cute, super cozy, super positive. Sometimes I do think that it was like a little bit too positive, which I think makes me sound super cynical, but like there's sometimes where it's like I would rather have it tone down the positivity a little bit. Let's have a little bit more conflict in the story. We don't have to throw that conflict away. But again, personal preference, and I feel like saying that it was too positive makes me feel a little cynical, but I still really enjoyed it and I really recommend it. We also have a trans main character, and again, a lot of different queer characters, especially moving into the second book. There's such an awesome amount of queer characters and positive queer representation. The next series of novellas that I would recommend is the Monster Girlfriend series by Marie Cardno. These are like supposed to be a cozy fantasy romance series, but there is, as far as I remember, like no on-page spice. There is 2 books that I read: How to Get a Girlfriend When You're a Terrifying Monster and How to Get a Date with the Evil Queen. The 3rd book just recently released, so I don't really remember its title, and I haven't yet read that one, so I can't tell you if there's like actual spice on page. In this book, we have Trilogy, who is a creature in the endless dimension. She is very described as being able to kind of morph into different shapes, and like having tentacles, and I think she is purple. There's some really, really wonderful artwork of Trilogy and Sion, who is our human love interest here, and I'll put it right here because I think it is absolutely beautiful. Sion is making a trip into the endless dimension, and Trilogy is very much intrigued by her form, by her humanness, and Trilogy then therefore gathers energy to kind of morph herself into something that is more human to kind of both please and intrigue Sion. But the endless dimension does not like when parts of it starts to become sentient. So if Trilogy wants to stay Trilogy and stay her own thing, she has to escape the endless dimension back with Sion into Sion's world. It's such a good relationship of these two just being so intrigued and so awed by each other. And honestly, the best way I can describe this is that this is a perfect novella for those of you who like your sci-fi to be unserious and a little bit horny. Even though there's no on-page spice, we're still a little unserious and we're still a little horny. And honestly, I think that kind of vibe is what I really enjoyed out of this story. I also did enjoy the second one, which is How to Get a Date with the Evil Queen, but it was missing some of those elements that I really enjoyed from the first book. It was less like spacey sci-fi kind of dealing and more like fantastical. I don't know, it just wasn't as awesome as the first one, but I am excited just to read the 3rd one to see if that has any of those like elements in the first novella that I really, really enjoyed. The final set of novellas that I want to recommend today is the Crowns of Ishia trilogy by Karin Lowachee. I have read the first book, The Mountain Crown. It was an ARC copy that I had from Nagel, and I rated it 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. The second book is coming out in January, and I have an ARC copy, but I haven't yet read it. And then the 3rd book is coming out sometime, I think late spring, early summer next year. In The Mountain Crown, our main character, Mecca, is from the Basuan tribe or the Basuan peoples, and she is traveling to the Karryn territories in order to travel up a mountain to gather a male dragon to bring it back to her land so that the balance of male and female dragons basically is balanced. The Basuan people are indigenous to all of this land, but the Katycans have come and conquered and colonized and pushed them away to a specific corner in order for the Katycans to have their territory. As Mecca is traveling through the town and up towards the mountain, she gets a little tiny ragtag of a team. She has some dragons that she encounters in the city that have been being abused. All in all, I'm realizing that this is such a hard novella to explain and describe because the amount of layers and depth to this novella is really what drew me in. First off, the dragons are super interesting and super cool. They're actually called Suan, they're not actually called dragons in the book, but the Suan and the Basuan people are able to kind of communicate almost telepathically. It's almost if they communicate off of like emotions and feelings and the presence of being around each other. And so that was such a cool link to have. So we have the concept of dragons. We have this concept of, you know, being indigenous to a land where people have colonized that land, and you're not treated correctly. You're basically having to prove your right to walk through the city where your ancestors lived and fought and breathed. There's themes of balance in the world and treating the world in such a balance. And it was so cool and such an incredible story. I definitely want to make like a more in-depth video one day about all three of these after all three have come out, just to kind of jot my thoughts down and to speak a little bit more about like Karryn Lowachee's writing and where she pulls her inspiration from. And I don't know, it's just such a unique and lovely story. Any dragon lover would love it. Any fantasy lover would love them, I think. I rated the first one 5 stars. I cannot wait to read the next 2 and just see where this story goes, because it's so rich and so unique and such a it left such a feeling of awe and respect and wonder, and it was just so cool. All in all, those are 24 novellas that I personally recommend to help crush your 2024 reading goals. If you've read any of these, please let me know. If you are going to add any of these to your TBR, please let me know. Would love to have discussions around any of these wonderful novellas. And like I said, especially with like the Mountain Crown and the Crowns of Ishia and maybe even the Binti trilogy, I'll probably make like separate videos for those and like how much I love them and what they're about, because they're super cool. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing, liking, and commenting on this video so that we can continue to be book besties and have wonderful chats about books in the future.